China added $18 trillion in wealth, faster than any country in modern history. So how did they actually pull it off? I spent years studying global economies before someone broke down China's real secret. And honestly, it changed the way I see money, power, and the modern world entirely. We are talking about an $18 trillion wealth surge. Let that number sink in. That is not a typo. $18 trillion added to a single nation's wealth. To put it in perspective, that is larger than the entire GDP of the European Union. But here's what nobody saw coming. And it happened in what feels like the blink of an eye on a historical timeline. So the question that kept me up at night was simple. How did they actually do this? Because the answer is not what most people think when they hear the word China. It is not just cheap labor. It is not just copying Western technology. Not even close. This video is going to break down the real forces behind one of history's greatest economic stories. And by the end, you will understand why this matters to your life, wherever you live. Let us start with what most people get wrong about China's rise. The common assumption is that China just got lucky, or that it played dirty to win. And look, there are legitimate debates about trade practices and intellectual property. But reducing $18 trillion of growth to luck or cheating misses the real picture. And this is where the story changes. The real question is, what combination of forces created this kind of compounding wealth? Because wealth at this scale does not happen by accident. It is engineered. And understanding how it was engineered is where things get genuinely fascinating. The first major force is industrialization, and China did it faster than any nation in history. In just a few decades, China moved hundreds of millions of people from farms to factories. That kind of labor mobilization created a manufacturing engine the world had never seen before. By 2010, China had already become the world's largest manufacturer. Full stop. The second force is something people underestimate: technological innovation at scale. China is not just assembling iPhones anymore. It is building its own tech giants. Companies like Huawei, Alibaba, and BYD are competing globally, not just domestically. This is the part most people miss. Here's the part that shocked me. China now files more patents than the United States. The country once accused of copying technology is suddenly out-innovating the West. That is not a small detail. The third force is global trade, and China played this game with extraordinary discipline. When China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, it was a calculated long-game move. Access to global markets meant Chinese goods could reach every corner of the planet, and Chinese factories scaled up to meet that global demand with terrifying efficiency. The fourth force is something economists call strategic economic policy. And this is crucial. The Chinese government did not just let markets run wild. It directed capital with precision. State investment went into infrastructure, education, and industries chosen to dominate globally. High-speed rail, ports, highways, and universities, all built with a unified national strategy. Now here is where the story gets really interesting. There was a specific turning point, and this is the moment that my professor finally helped me understand years into my studies. The turning point was Deng Xiaoping's economic reforms, which began in 1978. Before those reforms, China was largely closed off and economically stagnant. Deng made a decision that seemed radical at the time: open special economic zones to foreign investment. These zones were like laboratories where capitalism could be tested inside a communist state. And then came Shenzhen. In 1980, it was basically a fishing village. Today, it looks like a city from 2050. Today, it is a megacity. Now here's the uncomfortable truth. Foreign companies brought capital, technology, and management knowledge into these zones. Chinese workers and engineers absorbed that knowledge and then built on top of it. That transfer of knowledge became the foundation for everything that came after. Then came the internet age, and China did not just adopt it. China weaponized it for growth. E-commerce in China scaled faster than anywhere else because the infrastructure was ready. Alibaba alone processes more transactions on a single day than most countries do in a year, and the government's Belt and Road Initiative extended China's economic influence globally. Infrastructure loans to developing nations created trade routes and political alliances simultaneously. This is the part where people start to feel uncomfortable, and that discomfort is worth sitting with. Because China's rise is not a simple good or bad story. It is a deeply complex one. Hundreds of millions of Chinese citizens were lifted out of poverty because of this growth. At the same time, global supply chains shifted in ways that disrupted workers in other countries. The $18 trillion surge reshaped geopolitics, trade agreements, and global alliances. So here is the summary of what actually drove this historic wealth accumulation. Rapid industrialization, technological innovation, disciplined global trade, and strategic policy. All of it anchored by a pivotal reform moment that unlocked decades of compounding growth. This is not one factor, it is a system, and that system is still running right now. Now I want to hear from you. What do you think is the most underrated driver of China's growth? Drop your answer in the comments. Subscribe for more deep dives like this, and I will see you next time.